Performance Compensation Talent Management Committee to order. And the first order of business would be to call the roll, please. Ms. Hopper?
Rob Fechner.
Good morning.
Margaret Brown.
Good morning.
Lisa Middleton.
Good morning.
Stacy Oliveris. I don't see Stacy as of yet, Mr. Chair.
Correct.
Irena Ortega.
Morning.
Teresa Taylor.
Excused.
Shonda Wesley.
Present.
Mr. Chair, all is in attendance. As of yet, Stacy has not checked in.
I'm here.
Oh, Stacy, thank you. Okay, all is in
Good,
attendance.
Very good. Thank you very much. So before we move on to the next part of the agenda, item 2, I want to take up item 6, the action agenda item. I just want to get the sense of the committee. This is not time sensitive, not something we have to do now. Would you like to move forward on today's agenda with Grant Thornton, or would you like to wait until our new comp consultant comes on board, probably the next month? Let's just get a little feedback from the committee. Is anyone there?
Yeah, this is Margaret. I'd like to wait till the new consultant comes on board and see what their opinion is of long-term incentives. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Ortega, what do you think?
I agree.
All right, Ms. Middleton?
I agree.
Ms. Oliveris?
You're on mute.
Ms. Wesley?
I agree.
Thank you. Ms. Oliveris, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, I agree. And I'm also getting a little circle on my video, so my video is going to keep going out right now.
Yeah, I think everybody's is. I only have 2 people on my screen, so we're just going to have to play it by ear as we go. And maybe we won't be using WebEx next month or next time around. It's not been working so well. So thank you for that. So we will be pulling item 6A. Mr. Hoffner, you understand that part?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. All right, so moving on, we're now on item 2, the approval of the November 18th Pension Performance Compensation Talent Management Committee timed agenda. What's the opinion of the committee?
Move approval.
Moved by Brown. Is there a second?
Second, by Stacy Oliveris.
Seconded by Ms. Oliveris. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Ms. Hopper, please call the roll.
Margaret Brown.
Aye.
Lisa Middleton.
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris.
Aye.
Irena Ortega.
Aye.
Teresa Taylor.
Excused.
Shonda Wesley.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, I have the motion being made by Margaret Brown, Stacy Oliveris seconded for the approval of item 2, approval of the timed agenda.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3, executive report. Mr. Hoffner. You're muted, Doug. There you go.
The double mute. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, CalPERS team. Doug Hoffner. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. On the agenda today, we have an information consent item containing the fiscal year 1920 year-end compensation outcomes for the statutory positions as was requested last month. In addition, we also have one item related to the information we've gathered related to the financial interest separation requirement for the Chief Investment Officer position. You've just indicated the other item will be postponed until the new third-party consultant comes on board. That's Global Governance Advisors. I just want to make one note. We did have a preliminary conversation with them as we get to the point where we execute a contract with them. And in that preliminary discussion, based upon the feedback from the board, they did reduce their hourly rate by 15%. So I wanted to pass that information on to the committee. We still haven't finalized that contract. That will be coming in the pending weeks, but I wanted to pass that information on to you. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my executive report this morning.
Thank you. Well done in the negotiations, and thank you to GGA for reconsidering their numbers. So that's great news. So thank you. Seeing no request to speak, we'll move on to item 4, the action consent items. What's the approval of the committee?
Move approval.
Moved by Brown,
Second.
seconded by Wesley. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Ms. Hopper, please call the roll.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton, looks like, Mr. Chair, we've lost Lisa.
It looks that way.
Stacy Olivares,
Aye.
Arena Ortega,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Excused.
Shonda Wesley.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, we have a motion made by Margaret Brown, seconded by Shonda Wesley for agenda item 4A, approval of the committee minutes.
Very good. Thank you. Agenda item 5, the information consent items, 5A through C, having no request to withdraw any. We move on to item 7A, financial interest separation requirements for the CIO position. Ms. Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. This is Michelle Tucker, CalPERS team member. The information item before you provides an update on the financial separation requirements under consideration for the Chief Investment Officer CIO position. This is a follow-up from an item that was originally presented in September 2020. Since the September item, the team has gathered additional information from a variety of institutions, including consulting firms, public agencies, and other companies regarding conflict of interest mitigation strategies and requirements. We've learned there's a wide range of policy and legislative controls used in the investment and pension industry. The most significant determinant for the types of controls in place was the industry and regulatory environment. Most entities also gave consideration to the role an individual played in their organization when determining the type of financial separation required. For example, in the consulting industry, we discovered highly comprehensive and deep controls that were tied to regulation. In the public pension space, we discovered controls very similar to our current processes with restrictions on personal trades and using state processes. Other state agencies used a high dependence on state regulation, including the Statement of Economic Interest form, which is the Form 700. And in the private sector, we saw a large dependency on federal regulatory controls. Other large government organizations use policies that prohibited board members from influencing investments for which the members may have a financial interest. CalPERS is currently in the process of recruiting for a CIO, as you know. At this point, our proposal and plan is to require the selected incumbents to engage in a financial separation activity, such as selling any securities that could potentially give rise to a conflict under the Political Reform Act prior to assuming the position, or to dispose of those securities and place the resulting assets into a blind trust. However, the requirements may be further refined in consideration of additional information gathered, as well as information that we may be able to obtain once the board's new executive compensation consultant is under contract. The objective of any relevant mandate is intended to significantly diminish any perceived or real conflicts of interest originating from such assets. In engaging with Korn Ferry on the CIO recruitment, we've asked all potential candidates if such a requirement would affect their interest in the position. The compensation and recruitment consultants have shared their belief that adding such a requirement would have a marginal impact on our candidate pool. So thank you, members of the committee. That concludes this item, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or
I have a
comments?
question.
Oh, who was that?
Hi, this is Stacy Olivares.
Ms. Olivares.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Miller, Ms. Tucker, I want to understand to what extent that we reviewed Office of Government Ethics policies, particularly in how SEC commissioners are considered when it comes to their individual holdings.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Oliveira. So we did reach out to the SEC generally. We also reached out to some other organizations like Deloitte. A lot of the regulations that we found were based on a 1940 Investment Act, which was a federal piece of legislation. We also did review the ethics controls that are put out by the SEC So there is a wide variety of information out there, and our hope is to work with our executive compensation consultant to best determine how those various practices could be applied here at CalPERS.
So I think we need to take a more specific look at this. So the Federal Office of Government Ethics has clear determinations about what can be held by an individual based upon their position, particularly as it regards to SEC commissioners or others who have investment policy control or financial regulation control. So it's very specific. I think it's beyond just reaching out to the SEC.
I am aware of the published ethics regulations, and we did consider them. We found that that was widely used in many of the private groups that we consulted with. What we are trying to determine is which of those would apply here at CalPERS, and that's why we're proposing to push this out in February.
So maybe I can make a comment, Mr. Chair. The item that's included in the presentation both includes the blind trust option, but also basically the prohibition of owning such securities. So basically, in the role as the CIO, the idea would be that we wouldn't have that individual, whoever is the selected candidate, own such securities. The blind trust is identified in the PRA in terms of the Political Reform Act, and the idea behind that is a model whereby which a candidate could basically dispose of stocks or securities in a manner which an individual investor essentially would manage those securities. There would be potentially a time period whereby if those were known at the time before they were disposed by that individual third-party manager, they would need to be disclosed. But really the goal here is to have a prohibition or elimination of such securities held by the incumbent or the incoming CIO. And based upon feedback as well from our recruiter, we haven't received any negative feedback from potential candidates at this time, but that would be a negatively impact the recruitment as it stands today.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Ms. Oliveris, you have something else?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm also wondering how this would apply to the investment executives within INVO and then also executives outside of INVO and board members. Are we taking a look at that too? Or is this scope only going to be for the CIO position at this time?
At this time, Ms. Oliveris, this just relates to the one position, but I think to Ms. Tucker's comments that a deeper discussion about how that sort of the role-based approach would be implemented would be something we need to have a deeper discussion about. And I do think having the third-party consultant, global governance advisors, provide some feedback about that would be helpful. What we found in many of the organizations we talked with is a very role-based process whereby prohibitions in many cases were required depending on board level. This is in private companies or other pension institutions, depending on the type of seat they had or the role they had within the organization, there would be some allowance. And in some cases, we found that particularly in the auditing firms and the big four auditing firms, essentially, they had prohibitions on everything from you'd have to sell refinance your mortgage if you had a particular company that you might have an interest in, if they did auditing work, those kinds of things. So again, it's very specific to the type of role that folks might have within an organization and on the investment side or the executive side or other positions within CalPERS. And I think that's part of that deeper discussion about what that would look like. But today's item is really about the vacant CIO position and having a decision that basically puts a prohibition in effect for that role today. And then we would look at others as we move forward. And then to your point, could that impact board members and delegates, et cetera? That's I think a broader discussion, but I think based on what we've seen, there are potential prohibitions in many other organizations for those roles as well.
Thank you. And as we move forward with this too, I'd like to know if we've considered what fiduciary requirements there would be for these trusts. So if there were to be a blind trust requirement, oftentimes who the trustee selected is quite important. So typically you can't have a family member, for example, or a friend. In California, we have licensed fiduciaries who can act as trustees. So I would encourage us to take a look at that too. Thank you.
All right. Anything else, Ms. Oliveris?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to say I agree with a lot of Ms. Oliveris' comments in terms of we should not only be looking at the CIO, but other positions that have access to the same information and info in other departments. I'm wondering, Ms. Tucker, I live for data. I'm quite a nerd. And so I'm wondering, and you've talked about your research, but, I would love to see a little table that compares CalSTRS, UC regions, LACERS, maybe New York and Pennsylvania, the pension funds, what they do for their CIO position. I assume you've already done most of that work, but I'd love to see it in the little table. If you have it for beyond the CIO, that'd be great. But it'd be very simple, I think, to put that data in a table. My concern about making a future candidate sell all his or her assets and put them in a blind trust, and I believe it should be I like the idea of a California fiduciary trust, is that they're going to have a huge tax obligation depending upon when they bought those securities and have to sell them. And so I'm wondering if we could also look, and maybe I'll rely on Ms. Oliveris's experience, if we could look at more private securities than publicly held assets. If someone's, holding the Russell 2000 or MSCI or something else like that, I don't know that they would necessarily need to sell that. But I don't know. I don't know all the ins, all the ins and outs of someone who holds mutual funds. So, but I would like to see the table and compare us to other public pension funds. I know we're the largest, but I'd like to see what others do. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Ms. Tucker, can you maybe talk a little bit about some of those entities we have talked with? And I know we could put the chart together, but maybe UC, CalSTRS, some of the California-based entities, and just, State Street Bank, et cetera, that we have talked with, and then provide a little color there, and then we can provide the other documentation. And then I think maybe just real quick to Ms. Brown's comment, this is not a prohibition, let's say, against mutual funds. We're talking about individually held securities is what is referenced, so that would be allowable. I think the question is unknowing, we do not know what potential securities individuals who may be applying would own. There's a discussion that would go into that conversation and that process, but it's not a prohibition against mutual funds and those kinds of investments. So, but really the individually held securities would be the point of contention.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffner. And Ms. Brown, happy to provide the table. We did speak with CalSTRS, we spoke with UC Regions. We consulted with the National Association of State Retirement Administrators and received survey responses from about 8 to 10 agencies. So we have quite a bit of information there. We also talked to State Street, Deloitte, the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, several other public pension plans to the International Public Management Association. So we did do quite a bit of research, so happy to put all of that in a table. When they were state public pension systems, we saw largely very similar controls to what we have in terms of management of the personal trading, something like our Form 700 process, something akin to that. So again, happy to put that all on a table.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I appreciate that. And hopefully we could get that information way ahead of the meeting so we could maybe get some feedback, maybe through Insight or Diligent, just so when we come back in, is it February, we have sort of our ducks lined up in a row. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize if I repeat something that's already been said. I had some technical difficulties and I had to sign off and then sign back in. I came back in as Ms. Oliveris was talking about the SEC and some of the systems that they have in place. And I do believe that there have to be examples that we can use. As we know in the federal government, as individuals come into a new administration and cabinet and sub-cabinet positions, many of them are extremely wealthy and very heavily invested individuals who have to employ various blind trusts and other things in order to be able to carry out their federal obligations. So I strongly believe that there are examples out there for us to research, find, and be able to follow. I believe that it would be appropriate, if possible, to have a prohibition. I am open to a rules-based system, but it is incredibly important that we make conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest something that is in our past. That has to apply not only to the CIO, and I think it's appropriate to concentrate on that at the beginning, but it needs to apply broadly within the investment office, the executive suite, and the Board of Administration. And I'm willing to take the time to walk through each one of those to make sure that we get it right. If there is anything I have learned in 46 years of public service, for every problem, there is a quick, easy, and wrong solution. And we need to take the time to make sure that we get it right.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Next, Ms. Olivares.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton, for your comments. I can tell you that the blind trust process is not quick or easy. So as we go forward with looking into this option, I would also encourage us to look at a couple other things that are treated differently in terms of the public sector versus the private sector and conflict of interest. So I think it's been the standard that mutual funds are exempted from much of this in terms of conflict of interest and personal holdings. However, a mutual fund is just a fund managed by somebody else, and it's typically still a basket of securities. It's just a lot more expensive in terms of the fees you're paying compared to an ETF, and it's more difficult to sell. But you would still know what you're holding. So I think we should take another look at that and particularly focus on what the investment sector has to do in terms of their regulatory standards and compliance. And then ERISA versus non-ERISA accounts. So an ERISA account, for example, a 401k 457 cannot be held in a blind trust. So I would like us to take a closer look at that. An ERISA account can hold an investment that is inside of a blind trust, however. So it's an additional nuance. But again, if we are going to eliminate any potential conflict of interest, I think we need to look at this in detail and take the time to get this policy right. And again, work with our public pension counterparts and our private sector counterparts. And then as a blind trust is formed, it's important to look at liquid versus illiquid investments. So a publicly traded security can be sold the next business day. However, if we're talking about real estate investments that are directly held and would need to go into a blind trust, that can be complicated right now. So for it to be truly blind, that piece of real estate would need to be sold and the proceeds go into the blind trust. However, during this pandemic, that becomes a challenge when we have many people who are unable to pay their rent, when evictions are on hold. So it's challenging to sell real estate investments right now. So I would want us to take a look at that as well, please.
Very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else wishing to comment, anything else on this, Mr. Hoffner?
No, not at the moment. I think what the direction I heard, and maybe we'll get that in the summary committee direction, but basically looking at further analysis related to other roles and positions within the organization that both Ms. Olivares and Ms. Middleton raised earlier, and then look at other restrictions that may be applicable in that analysis. And I would indicate this is a complex issue and it's not easy. And I think to Mrs. Middleton's point, there are maybe a variety of potential solutions to this, and they may take a little bit of time as well.
Very good. Thank you. Brings us to 7B, summary of committee direction. Mr. Hoffner.
Two that I recorded, essentially, you have the long-term incentive related item that essentially is deferred for discussion and analysis with the board's independent incentive compensation consultant, Global Governance Advisors, once they're under contract, and then we'll look to have a discussion with them and bring that back at the appropriate time. I think the next scheduled meeting is in February, and we'll have them under contract before then. And then secondly, just the feedback we've received on this item and additional information that was requested, not only just the tables of information of the groups we've talked with, but other items as it relates to liquid, illiquid, ERISA, et cetera. So we'll look at further work on that item.
Very good. Item 7C is public comment. Mr. Fox, anyone from the public wish to address the committee?
Mr. Chair, we have no callers on this committee.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our agenda. The Board Governance Committee is next, and I think Mr. Jones is on here, but Mr. Jones, how about 9:45?
No, Mr. Fector, we have to wait till 10 o'clock. It's noticed for 10 o'clock.
Oh, it is very good. Okay, thank you. All right, so we will be back with Board Governance at 10 o'clock.
Thanks for an efficient board meeting.
Pardon?
Thank you for an efficient board meeting. Nice job.
We'll try and work through it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.